Beehive sculptures are pretty uncommon, but painters, especially here in America's creative crossroads, are a lot more prevalent.
This week on Arts Upload, we'll introduce you to an emerging artist whose work is starting to get a lot of positive attention.
His name is Kwanzaa Humphrey, and the portraits he paints have been featured in shows at the Kansas City Artists Coalition and the Kemper Albrecht Museum in St. Joe.
Kwanzaa draws and paints at his studio in Shawnee, which is where producer-videographer Julie Denichet watched him doing his work.
I like to draw people, portraits, faces. I'm just really kind of drawn to people and different kinds of people from all walks of life. I've always wanted to get to know people and wanted to kind of know their stories and what they're all about. And I think what I try and capture is not just that person, but something that's universal to kind of humanity and to everyone. I get something from being able to kind of put what's in my head and what I see, in the world around me onto, a piece of paper or a canvas. I remember my first drawing when I was in kindergarten at 5, and you know how you lay your hand down on a piece of paper and you trace it, and then, it looks like a hand, and that works. So I tried to do the same thing with this little car, and so I laid it on its side and I traced it, and it's not a flat, thing like your hand is, so it's not as easy to trace. And I got done with the drawing. I was like, this doesn't look anything like I want it. So I set it down and I just kind of looked at it and started drawing it. And then from that point on, I always try to interpret it, kind of through my eyes. One of my signatures is the way that I use color. I don't mix a lot of colors on my palette. I like to use kind of straight color and optically blend them on the canvas. I start with the black and white, like the drawings here, and get my kind of composition and my values set up. And then it's really kind of I let the subject matter inform, kind of where I'm going to go with the colors. A lot of times I'll take, 2 or 3 months where I'm not really painting, or I may not even be drawing, but it's like the wheels are constantly churning, and I'm soaking in, ideas and in my environment, and subconsciously thinking about the next thing I'm going to do. And how it all starts is I see things that are just like, man, I really want to capture that, and I can experience that feeling. And so hopefully I can get that, capture that in a way that I can, give it to others and then let other people kind of experience that same feeling that I felt.
I met Kwanzaa 2.5 years ago, approximately. I think he's a good painter, but he would show me a sketchbook and say, what do you think of this and this? And I was so charmed by his sketches, that's why we decided to have the sketchbook show. I think he's got a great way of covering a person's personality. They're not exact drawings of these people. He's got a couple of me, and they're certainly not exact, but they capture the essence of the people. And some of them are strangers, some of them are people he knows, and I think they're just charming.
I'm 40 now, and I've always been doing art to a certain extent, and it's whether it's graphic design, that's kind of my day job that pays the bills, and I'm at a point now in some of my fine art that it can start to pay for itself, and as much as I was drawing, as much as I love that, when I got back into painting, it's like, man, I really love this. It's a challenge for me to kind of get it to the vision that I want, and the more I'm doing it, the better I'm starting to feel about the way that I'm painting now. There's like that mechanism that's always seems to be on, that I'm always kind of observing, and a lot of times I think that's kind of like who I am. It's being present and in the moment, and really kind of capturing kind of what's there really that's what art is about, for me, is being able to see, and not necessarily just see what's in front of you, but kind of see, beyond that initial layer and capture, see the emotion, see kind of what's just below the surface. And I think, when you see that far, then that's when you can start creating things that connect with other people.